The role of the uniquely talented and multifaceted Taysom Hill is going to look very, very different in the New Orleans Saints 2022 offense. What that means for Taysom Hill, what it means for the Saints offense, and why this year's performance could end up impacting his NFL future. We got all that and a little bit of lagniappe for you on today's episode of Locked On Saints.
You are Locked On Saints, your daily New Orleans Saints podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is good, Who Dat Nation and Who Dat family? Welcome into this Monday episode of Locked On Saints, your daily podcast covering the New Orleans Saints, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks so much as always, making Locked On Saints your first listen of the day every day. Don't forget that we're free and available on all podcast apps and on YouTube as well. And I'm your host, Ross Jackson, at Ross Jackson Nola on Twitter. You can find me over at USA Today's Saints Wire, Tuesdays on Locked On NFL, and here with you every single Monday through Friday on Locked On Saints. And today's episode is brought to you by our friends over at Bet Online. They've got more odds, lines, and props than ever before. Bet Online, where the game starts. Today's episode, I want to break down the future of Taysom Hill, how his new role impacts his future, how his new role impacts the Saints offense, and what are the biggest questions that lay ahead for Taysom Hill as well. So to get us all started, I think the biggest thing to look at here is how Taysom Hill's new role will impact the New Orleans Saints offense, because it does give the Saints a little bit more of a, let's just say, additional weapon all over the field. And so he can end up being an X factor for New Orleans once he's healthy and once he's on the field. Now, we should define what his new role is as best as we know so far. Head coach Dennis Allen, soon after announcing that the Saints were going to be re-signing Jameis Winston and having him as their starting quarterback going into 2022, came out and basically said that Taysom Hill will no longer be in the running at quarterback. That was an important thing for Dennis Allen to do, right? Because you end up having Taysom Hill, who is on a 4-year, $40 million contract that is effectively a high-end, tight end contract. Now, there's all the incentives and escalators that he could have potentially earned with some fantastic seasons at quarterback that would have made him a much more highly paid player, but those things aren't going to happen, and it was unlikely that those things were going to happen anyway. I mean, the incentives that were there are pretty substantial in order to really be able to earn what the maximum level of that contract was going to end up being. So instead, Dennis Allen comes out soon after re-signing Jameis Winston, after trying to pursue Deshaun Watson first, and basically says, look, Taysom Hill's not in the running any longer at quarterback. We're going to use him in a bunch of different ways. He's going to kind of be used as more of an F move tight end. We'll define what that means in a moment. But it also ended up effectively showing some loyalty to Jameis Winston, who they could have potentially burned a bridge with a little bit. You saw what happened with the Atlanta Falcons, right? And with Baker Mayfield and the Cleveland Browns when they went after this other quarterback and then ended up kind of soiling the relationship with the quarterback that was currently in the building. Jameis, better understanding a little bit of the business side of it as he was a free agent at the time, but still coming out and basically saying, hey, Dennis Allen is loyal to Jameis Winston as a starting quarterback ahead of 2022 was a smart move by the organization, was a smart move by Dennis Allen. It was the right thing to do. So what that ends up meaning is that things look a bit different in terms of how the offseason will look this year, as opposed to what the offseason has looked like in the past. In the past, we've seen offenses sort of be prepared for both Jameis Winston and Taysom Hill. Now we're going to watch Jameis Winston step into an offense that is particularly built for him throughout training camp, lead that along with Pete Carmichael, who is building an offense specifically for Jameis Winston. So that ends up being helpful in terms of the preparation throughout the offseason. So that'll have an immediate impact. But what does it mean for Taysom Hill? And what does being an F move tight end actually mean? So when you look at the way that offenses tend to designate their skill position players, you'll see some letter abbreviations like X for an X receiver or a Z for a Z receiver. Your X receiver is generally your split end, your number one wide receiver, the go-to guy. He's Michael Thomas, right? Your Z is usually a flanker that's a little bit more of a deep threat field stretcher that lines up a little bit off the line of scrimmage. He ends up being, a guy like Chris Olave this year. F ends up usually referring to a couple of different things. It could be a tight end that's in line opposite the Y, which is your traditional tight end, or it ends up being somebody that lines up in the slot. The Saints use F for the slot a lot. So when you talk about an F move tight end, you're talking about somebody that can line up as a tight end, but not just in line. You can use him in the slot. You can use him out of the backfield. You can use him in a bunch of different ways. Another way that maybe you could have heard him designated was a little bit more of like an H-back tight end, which would be somebody akin to what Josh Hill was in the past, where he lined up in the backfield, lined up in line. But you're going to do some extra things with Taysom Hill. And that's one of the reasons why I believe that Taysom Hill, once he's healthy, ends up being a very valuable piece for the New Orleans Saints offense. How much can he produce with the amount of receivers and the amount of targets that are going to be out there? We'll see. But regardless, he ends up being a valuable piece for the New Orleans Saints offense, because the thing that's always made him special is what he's able to do when he gets the ball in his hands and his ability as a pass catcher. That's always been the thing that made him special. So now all of a sudden, you have a tight end to where when you run these tight end screens that the Saints love, we all know third and long, there might be a tight end screen coming. All of a sudden, Taysom Hill gets to be a little bit of a game breaker in those scenarios and in those situations. So it has a positive impact for Jameis Winston, who now gets to prepare competition-free going into the 2022 season. It has a positive impact on Dennis Allen, who is trying to grow a relationship with his quarterback as a first-year tandem at head coach and quarterback. It has a positive impact on the offensive coordinator, who can focus on building one offense for a specific quarterback. And it kind of has a positive impact for Taysom Hill as well. I've heard a lot of people that have asked questions about, is Taysom Hill's ego going to be an issue? Which I don't think we've ever seen any evidence of Taysom Hill having an ego, but we all have to have one, right? We all have to know what we're worth. But I think that the pressure that ends up on Taysom Hill ends up coming a little bit ahead or taking priority over the ego. Again, pressure is not a bad thing. Pressure can be a good thing. And in this case, it certainly is for Taysom. He's somebody that's going to end up doing whatever it is that this team asks. Remember, he took his first snaps as a New Orleans Saint and really put his name on the map as a New Orleans Saint on special teams and punt coverage units late in the 2017 season. So that's the way that he ended up becoming a household name, not just in New Orleans, not just among Saints fans, but across the NFL, that and the contracts. So I think that for Taysom, I don't expect there to be any issues that him not competing at quarterback will end up hindering his performance in 2022. But what will his performance look like in 2022, and what exactly will be his role? How will he be utilized? Let's break all of that down next, because if Taysom Hill is going to be somebody that has a large role over on the offensive side, it has to be really, really clearly defined. And just because he's going to be focusing at that F move tight end doesn't mean that you won't see him under center. Let's break all that down as we continue on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Did you know that there are multiple games for the New Orleans Saints 2022 season you can already put some money down on over at Bet Online? They are -5 to open the season on the road against the rival Atlanta Falcons, favored there. They're underdogs up against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers week 2 at home, +3.5, and they're favored on the road, really, really on the road in London, up against the Minnesota Vikings, -2 there. So feeling good about any of those lines. Expect the Saints to upset the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and maybe you could even hit the money line on that one week 2. There is a ton for you to check out over at Bet Online, our exclusive online betting partners. They've got the NFL, NBA, MLB, and so much more for you to check out all year round. They have lacrosse lines that you can get in on sometimes, and even esports as well. And their live betting module is really, really cool, allowing you to follow the trends in action as they develop and bet with or against the flow of the game that you're watching. Really, really cool way to stay engaged, and a bunch of different ways to make sure that you feel the most connected to your favorite sports all throughout the season. So go and check them out. Bet Online, where the game starts. All right, family, continuing on with today's episode of Locked On Saints. Real quick, I thought about starting off the episode with this, but I like to give you the Saints content right off the bat. But real quick, I just want to say thank you over on our YouTube side. 10,000 subscribers. The podcast is thriving. Y'all have been continuing to come back to this podcast, even in the dead of the offseason. And I thank you so much for the support, for being a part of this. We're going to have to come up with some kind of nickname for everybody, because if you're tuning in this late in the off season, you deserve several treats, several nicknames, all the good stuff. So we'll come up with something, but I appreciate y'all so much for everything. And I thank you so much for making us your first listen of the day, every day. We're breaking down Taysom Hill here He's expected to have a new role going into 2022, or not necessarily new, but maybe a refocused role, right? One that sees him a little bit more involved in the passing game. So let's set let's set the table a little bit. What was his performance last year in the receiving game, and what does that mean for him going into 2022? Last year, he played 314 snaps at quarterback, but I don't think that, even because you're talking about him potentially switching over to a little bit more of a pass catcher focus, that the quarterback snaps are necessarily going to just disappear. I don't think that number is going to be 0 at the end of next season. He also took 13 out of the backfield, 33 in line. So think about your tight end that's lined up tight to the tackle. 38 in the slot, 32 out wide, and it also took 27 various special team snaps and coverages and things like that. Only played 52 receiving snaps in terms of routes run in 2022. And that had a lot to do with the fact that he was really only able to be a receiver for a short amount of time, right? Effectively the first 5 games really. And then he had the injury as well that kept him out. And then he ended up taking over as quarterback once he was healthy and able to take over Trevor Siemian. So I think that really factors into that a lot. But at the beginning of the season, you didn't see a ton from him, right? You saw about 4 catches, 20 some odd yards, not a lot really going for him. What could he finish with in 2022 all depends upon how much of a receiver role he actually ends up playing. I think the biggest thing to remember here is that he's not going to be a backup quarterback. So whatever role we see him in once he's back, once he's healthy, and once he's back out on the field is very likely the role that we'll see him in all throughout the season. If Jameis Winston, God forbid something happens and he has another leg injury or a different injury or anything like that, or even just needs to sit for a second, whatever it might be, like a helmet comes off and whatnot, so you have to sit out for a play, Andy Dalton's going to be the guy that's going to come in there. And then if something were to happen to Andy Dalton and they needed more time with Jameis Winston's helmet, then all of a sudden Ian Book goes in there. So I think that there is something to remember in that, right? That we shouldn't expect that to look very different. He's mostly going to be a pass catcher in 2022. And that's okay. I think that's good. I mean, I think that's a good role for him. Like we've mentioned before, he has been somebody that, he has more touchdowns than Julio Jones over his last few years as an Atlanta Falcon. Like there were a lot of things that he did really, really well in that area of the game. So it's good that they're going to focus him in where he's maybe been most consistently successful, which is as a pass catcher, particularly against the Atlanta Falcons, but that's a different story. So when we look back at what his role will be going into 2022, it's worth mentioning that even though he's going to be somebody that's going to be effectively a part of the tight end room, it doesn't mean that he's not going to get snaps at quarterback. Maybe he doesn't throw passes, but utilizing him as a power runner, right? In the QB power situations on like a 2nd and short or even a 3rd and short, or even faking it with that in a 4th and short situation, right? And then you go the other direction with Alvin Kamara or something like that. There's a lot of different ways that he ends up being utilized under center, not just as somebody that actually keeps the ball, but as a decoy in a way. Another way to do that would be a read option, right? Utilizing him a little bit more as a read option quarterback, which we didn't see a ton of in 2022. So I think developing a more specified role for him is something that makes a ton of sense, as opposed to him being in, the tight end room all season, being in the running backs room, right, for certain games and certain game plans and things like that, and then having to go out and play quarterback. He gets to be in the room and actually learn the thing that he's doing, but then have a little bit of a specified role or specialized role under center should the time come. And it becomes a little bit more situational, becomes a little bit more circumstantial, more than it is a part of the actual game plan on a game in, game out basis, right? Like there might be some games where you don't see Taysom Hill go under center at all. There might be other games where you see him go under center for 3 or 4 different plays, but how many times is he going to be throwing passes? Probably not very often. Or you can set up tendencies at the beginning of the season and then break tendencies late in the season, which is something the New Orleans Saints have always done really well. And yes, I know Sean Payton's no longer in the building, but Pete Carmichael is, Dennis Allen is, the disciples of Sean Payton are. There's still going to be some of that trend-setting work and then trend-breaking work that you'll see the New Orleans Saints do throughout the season. And Taysom Hill, because of his versatility, because of his multifaceted, uniquely talented ways, will be able to be a big part of that, right? And he'll be a big part of not only being able to game plan it, but also being able to run it successfully. I also think that Taysom Hill's experience at quarterback over the past couple of seasons helps him in terms of hey, I need to help Jameis Winston get out of this bind. I know what the rules are. I know what he's looking for. Let me do that. Let me give him what he needs. He becomes a little bit more of an anticipator as a pass catcher, maybe the best anticipator as a pass catcher outside of maybe Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. He becomes that other guy on the field that knows, okay, this is what Jameis is going to do if these routes don't develop. If he's pressured from this side or that side, let me go and do the thing that will help him. Let me be where he needs me to be, because I know where I would need a player to be if that was me. I just keep dropping these bars. So I think that becomes a huge part of why Taysom Hill's uniquely talented, multifaceted ways become even more uniquely fit for the New Orleans Saints. And you give Dennis Allen the opportunity to always have the 11 best players out on the field for any game situation. One of the things that Dennis Allen talked about was that he hated the idea of having Jameis Winston out on the field with Taysom Hill standing next to him, or Taysom Hill out on the field with Jameis Winston standing next to him. Both of those guys should be on the field because they are amongst, in terms of skill position players and all of that, they are amongst the best players, best 11 players that could be out on the field in specific situations. There are going to be times where Taysom Hill isn't a fit, run plays, things like that, unless you're lining him up in the backfield. But if you're going with, not an empty backfield, but a single backfield with just Alvin Kamara or whatever running back is in for that week, depending upon what happens with Alvin Kamara, you're probably going to lead with guys like Adam Troutman and Nick Van Epp because they're solid run blockers. You're probably going to lead if you need a sixth protector, you need, another blindside protector or anything like that. You're probably going to lead with either an eligible offensive lineman or a tight end. You're not going to utilize Taysom Hill as a pass protector very much. Maybe a chip and go kind of guy, but not somebody that's going to stay in and give you that maximum protection when you're trying to just run a 2-route combination and take a shot downfield, right? You're going to go with the guys that are the proven pass blockers, the proven run blockers in those situations. So that means that Taysom Hill, even as a pass catcher, won't be out on the field every single play, but he should see some substantial snaps in 2022. Now, when he's out there, you can expect the good, but what are some of the biggest question marks around Taysom Hill? How does he impact that tight end room? When is he going to be ready? And what will he finish with as a receiver in terms of a stat line in 2022? Let's answer all those questions as we wrap up today's episode of Locked On Saints. Before we get to that, I want to tell you about our friends over at Rock Auto, the best place for you to head for everything that you need for your vehicle. If you're somebody that is rebuilding a classic, for instance, and you need an expansive, easy to navigate catalog for every single part, piece, and accessory that you've ever thought of when it comes to a vehicle, Rock Auto is absolutely that place for you. So go and check them out, rockauto.com. It's a family business. They've been helping auto parts customers online for over 20 years online, and they're effective. They're a small business, so you get to help them out as well. You get to, be a part of the small business situation and helping them as they help you out. All of that really, really helpful staff as well that's available to help anytime that you're online. And it's, like I said, super easy to navigate catalog. So whatever it is that you need for your car, your truck, your vehicle, whatever it is, you can head over to rockauto.com and find it in absolutely no time and pay 30, 50, sometimes 70% less of the competitors that you have to put pants on to go and see. That's all I'm saying. You can do all this from the comfort of your home over at Rock Auto. Don't forget to let them know that Locked On sent you, and Locked On in the How'd You Hear About Us section. Amazing selection, reliable low prices, and all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. Let's get it, Who Dat Nation. Wrapping up today's episode of Locked On Saints, continuing our look at Taysom Hill, his role, and his impact in 2022. We're going to break down here in just a sec what we think Taysom Hill's production might look like in 2022, but there are some big questions that he's got to be able to answer. And this year could end up having a big time impact on his future in the NFL. Let's face it, Taysom Hill is very unlikely to become an NFL quarterback. If not with the New Orleans Saints, I don't know where else it's going to happen for him across the NFL. So this offensive role that he's playing is one that he very likely would have for the remainder of his career. But he's also going on 32 years old at this point. And so that's the other reason around all of this, right? Like, he kind of has to make this work this year. And it's, again, another reason why I don't think you're going to hear him gripe at all about his role or be upset about him not being a quarterback or whatever. I don't see that being a reality for him because he's kind of got to get this right if he wants to maintain his NFL career for the little while that he has left, the few years that he has left. in his career. Now, he carries a $23.77 million dead cap hit if he's cut after this season. So I don't think that this season ends up dictating immediately what happens with him, but we'll start to see what the plan is for him next offseason. If he's somebody that doesn't fill out very successfully in this role, his $9.9 million base salary probably won't get restructured next season, meaning that the Saints won't be looking to drop his salary cap hit next year. Instead, they'll be looking to carry a lesser dead cap hit going into 2024 when they could potentially move on from him, or at least have the option open. So maybe it's this year and next year that really end up filling out what happens for his career, but this year kicks it all off for him. Because if this doesn't go very successfully, then he gets relegated to maybe a special teams or reserve role going into 2023 or 2024, right? Depending upon how much longer they keep him around. So a successful year for Taysom Hill ends up having an impact on his NFL future, particularly showing that he can be this offensive weapon role without continuing to compete at quarterback. So what are the questions that he has to answer along with production? First of which is, when is he going to be ready to go? We've seen Taysom take on a lot of injuries. Now, he had the I want to call it hammer thumb. He had the finger injury last season. He had the concussion last season, which was absolutely not his fault. That was just a ridiculous hit and an illegal hit by that Washington defender. And then you also had him finishing the season in week 18, right? The 17th game of the year with a Lisfranc injury, which can really vary in terms of what the recovery time is. So going out there on training camp, which reminder, I'll be out there on training camp. You're going to get a lot of 2-a-days and things like that during camp starting on the 26th. But is he going to be there? Is he present? Is he available? Is he going to be working? Like, how soon do we see him? These Lisfranc injuries can last forever. They can heal suspiciously quickly. You never know exactly what's going to happen there. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Taysom is able to do and how much time he has to do it. I have sort of begun to prepare for the idea that he starts the season on the physically unable to perform list, which would mean that he wouldn't be available for the first 6 games of the year. But that's purely speculation. That's me saying, all right, if the injury needs more time, then that would make a lot of sense for them to go about it that way, as opposed to just putting him on preseason IR and ending a season. That doesn't make sense. You go to PUP and then you give him the opportunity to be able to get back out there later on in the season when he's had time to heal up. Now, is he going to be able to help the tight end room? That's the other big question, right? Now, for whatever games that he is available, which hopefully he's out there week 1, because again, he has a lot of success against the Atlanta Falcons. But if he's out there immediately, then that ends up bolstering your tight end room quite a bit. Adam Troutman, Nick Vanette, Juwan Johnson, Taysom Hill. That's a good group to have. It's not Jimmy Graham. It's not, dare I say, Jared Cook. It's not those guys. It's not Benjamin Watson in his 2 that year. Like, it's not those guys, but that group ends up having an impact for you. And again, Taysom's not going to be somebody that's going to see the same amount of snaps as Adam Troutman or Nick Vanette, because as blockers, they're going to get priority. They're going to see the field more. But when it comes to pass catching and pass catching opportunities, getting Taysom Hill out on the field makes a ton of sense. Even getting Taysom Hill out in addition to those guys makes a ton of sense. And going into what would be more of a 12 personnel or 1 running back and 2 tight end personnel with 2 wide receivers on the outside, there's a lot of different ways that he ends up impacting that tight end room. And the biggest piece of it would hopefully be more production in the receiving game in particular. Now, we know that last year's offensive production in the passing game will not be the same story as this year's production in the passing game. But just looking back at last year, your leading receiver when it came to tight ends was Adam Troutman with 263 yards. Now, your leading receiver didn't even have 700 and Marquez Callaway with 698. So again, these two things don't necessarily equate, but when you look at what the role was, you had Adam Troutman at 263, you had Nick Vanette at 133, you had Taysom with 52 on 4 catches, and then Garrett Griffin with 39 on 4 catches. I think I said Taysom had like 20-something. He had a couple of games with 20-something receiving yards, but he ended with 52 total. So the role that you're going to see these guys play needs to be a bigger pass catching role, because you can't end up with that, right? You can't have 1,000-yard receiver in Michael Thomas, a couple of 600 or 700-yard receivers or more with Chris Olave and Jarvis Landry. That would be great. And then not have a guy like Adam Troutman or Nick Vanette or Taysom Hill at least exceed 300 yards, right? I mean, getting 263, like that's inexcusable. So you have to see them play a larger role in the passing game. And that's a big place where Taysom Hill helps. It's also a big place where Juwan Johnson helps, who didn't get as much opportunity as I think maybe he should have gotten in 2021. And hopefully we'll see a little bit more going into this year. He had 159 yards. He was actually your second leading tight end in terms of receiving yards with 13 catches and 159 yards, but also had 4 touchdowns. Like, this dude just produces. He puts points on the board. So you're not mad at that at all. So you can throw Juwan Johnson up there above Nick Vanette, right, in terms of receiving game, but he still needs more opportunities, in my opinion. He only was targeted, 22 times in 2022. Taysom Hill was only targeted 6 times in 2022. We know why that's the case. We should see that bolster going into, or in 2021, we should see that bolster going into 2022. Now, will Taysom Hill have at least 300 receiving yards in 2022? I think some of this depends on Alvin Kamara. If Alvin Kamara misses some portion of 6 games, I can see Taysom Hill getting 200 receiving yards just over the course of those 6 games that Alvin Kamara is out, if Taysom Hill is healthy and in. So I can see Taysom Hill exceeding 300 receiving yards. But the big question is, can he get to 400? Can he sniff 500? That's where he has a massive impact on this passing game. And then, of course, all the things that he can continue to do as an H-back, all the things he can continue to do out of the backfield and as a runner from the quarterback position. So Taysom Hill might see his role shift in 2022, but once he's healthy, I have a hard time believing that it will diminish in terms of his ability to be able to impact games and his ability to be able to impact and make an impact for this New Orleans Saints offense. So don't sleep on Taysom Hill going into 2022 just because he's not competing at quarterback. It doesn't mean that he won't end up being some type of an integral part of this offense. Just have to see if he can get out there healthy. Got to see if he's going to be able to help that tight end room pick up in the passing game or in the receiving game, and if he's going to be able to produce on his own as well. If he can answer those 3 questions, and if you get yes, yes, and yes there, then all of a sudden Taysom has a really nice season in 2022. Doesn't have to be an all-pro season, doesn't have to be a Pro Bowl season, anything like that. He just has to produce. And if he can do that, then his role moving forward and his NFL future is a little bit more clear with the New Orleans Saints going into 2023 and potentially even beyond. All right, y'all, coming up in tomorrow's episode, the training camp right around the corner. Who are the breakout candidates that we're keeping an eye out on? We'll go through the players that could break out in 2022, few on offense, few on defense, and why Pete Werner's name continues to come up and why it's one that you should not dismiss. We've got that coming up for you as we continue on this week here on Locked On Saints. As always, I appreciate you so much for making us your first listen of the day every day. Thank you again for 10,000 subscribers over on YouTube and for continuing to check out the show. Be back with you tomorrow for your second listen today. Make sure you go and check out that Locked On NFL YouTube page or Locked On NFL wherever you get your podcasts. Everything you need to know around the league in less than 30 minutes. I appreciate you as always, making me a part of your day. I'll see you tomorrow. If you see me, say hi. And for everything you need in between these episodes, make sure you follow me on Twitter at Ross Jackson, NOLA. Hit me up. Let me know how the family's doing. Let me know how you're living. Let me know how your mom and them. And trust Who Dat Nation. I'll holla at you.